the Carol's last Christmas. Sorry.
Got it. No, we're good. And if you can't hear me at any time, just like give me a little shout or whatever. I'll try to be loud, but it's a pretty small room, so I feel like we'll be okay. Okay, so we're here today to talk about the murder of Carol Rofstad. And I want to discuss the case first a little bit and then get into like the facts and how we came across, how we started the podcast, how we kind of, all of this transpired from 1975 now to 2023. And I also want to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So slides as quickly as possible. I also have audio clips from some of the podcast episodes. I don't know if everybody's listened to it or not, but I think it really adds something extra to the story that we're trying to tell here, and it gives the presentation something extra. Oh, perfect. Okay, so I first want to start off with who was Carol Rofstad. In 1975, Carol Rofstad was 21 years old. She was an ISU student and a member of the Delta Zeta sorority on campus. She was beautiful, she was bright, she was popular, she was just the perfect college girl, really. She was a psychology major, incredibly independent, and beloved by everybody she met. Everybody who met her loved her. She was from Elk Grove Village, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago, and she had transferred to ISU from Western Illinois University. She was super kind, super sweet. I mean, I could go on and on about just the perfect person that she was. And I want to stress too that we shouldn't be sitting here because Carol should be alive today. So that's a point that I really like to emphasize in these presentations. But instead, we are here because the 24th will be on Christmas Eve. It'll be 48 years of her murder case being unsolved. And I'll start this kind of in chronological order from 1974 on. So we'll kind of take it in that direction. So rewind to 1974. Carol is living in the sorority house in the summer to catch up on some college credits, and she was attacked for the first time. And this audio clip that I'm going to play is going to tell you some of the details, but it becomes increasingly relevant once the murder happens. So initially it was just an attack, but it will make more sense once we get into the actual murder. So I'm going to play the clip. Oh, hold on. I might have to reconnect.
That's okay.
Bear with me. I'm determined to get this audio clip to work. Let's see. Let me try. Hold on. It's one of the two.
If not, maybe it turned off.
The speaker.
Maybe.
So I might have to be closer.
Yeah. I don't really know if it's.
Perfect.
The back door had a window and just broke the window and it fell on carpet, so you know, we never heard. And then just could open the door.
I think the door was even unlocked, if I understand correctly. I don't remember.
First they tried to break into the basement through like one of those casement windows, but couldn't get in.
Once he got in there, there was just a bar that would open the door and let him in. A push bar. So he just pushed that and got himself in. And I had to work that night. But the girls were going out to party. It was summer. I understand. So there's very few people in the house, maybe 10 girls. So all the girls went out to party to the bars, except for me. And I got home. I usually got home around 1:30. because I worked at night. I got home 1:30 in the morning and had just fallen asleep. And all of a sudden I heard this screaming, and oh my God, they're home drunk. I got 7 o'clock class, please go to bed, please go to bed. And I rolled over, and then I heard this blood curdling scream, and I ran out of my bedroom door, and right across was Carol. The door to her bedroom was open. She was in a pink like teddy. Her face was all bloody. She said he hit me into the dresser. He just threw me into the dresser, and I was just, trying to get her to stop screaming. And then everybody else in the house came running, and I was president of the sorority, trying to call the police, and all the telephone wires had been cut, except for the apartment in the basement.
Templeton discovered that a 10 to 12-inch hole had been smashed in the window of the back door. The man cut a phone cord about an inch from the phone with a sharp-bladed instrument.
And there was a closed door on his right, which was my bedroom, and a closed door on his left, which was Carol's bedroom. And he went in that door, put his hand over her mouth and said, if you scream, I don't know if he said, I'll hurt you or I'll kill you, or he said something like that. I can't remember exactly. And so, of course, she screamed because she was a smart girl. And he picked her up and threw her against the dresser, broke her nose. He had already gone out through the kitchen and down the fire escape.
She gave the following description: wearing green work pants, straight-legged, cuffed, long sleeve.
She said he was dressed, we call him green jeans, because he was dressed like in a green work outfit, like, like one of those worker uniforms.
And we refer to him too as Mr. Green Jeans because that's what the women in the sorority at the time referred to the perpetrator as, based on the description that Carol gave to the authorities. So now flash forward to 1975, December 22nd. So everybody's going home for Christmas break. This is about 16, 17 months after the attack, and Carol is dead. Carol meets up with her best friend after they both get off of work that day. They go to the Cellar, which was a local bar that was up the street from where they worked, to see if anybody they knew was there. They stayed there for about 10 minutes, according to reports, and then they left. They parted ways at one point on their way home. Carol headed back up the Fell Street to the direction of the sorority house, and her friend went the other direction, but she never made it back to her bedroom. She was found outside the sorority house the following day near the side of the house, covered in her coat was covered over her. She was hit over the head with a piece of wood, which is described as 3 blows to the head. She was also found with her pantyhose down around her knees. And at this time, she is still alive because the person who discovered her had heard a moan come from the body laying there, and she had been laying outside for 12 hours because she was found later at around lunchtime the next day, and it was around 10 p.m. the night before that they walked towards the sorority house. Police were called to the scene, and Carol was transported to the hospital and eventually to Peoria, where they had a trauma center so that she could undergo surgery. The investigation then quickly turned to a murder investigation when she passed away on December 24th. And then this audio clip that I'm going to share talks about the initial investigation and kind of how Carol was discovered, so you can hear the language too that's read directly from the police report.
The police reports we eventually got are heavily redacted. That means names, addresses, and lots of key information is simply blacked out, like a page full of zebra stripes.
During my talk with Blacked Out, I learned that a person named Blacked Out had made the statement at a party that he was the person that killed Carol.
What you're left with is a puzzle with a lot of missing pieces. Challenging, but not impossible.
Down toward the bottom of the page, they did make one mistake where they blacked out everything else. The guy that beat his wife and put her in the hospital for 2 months, they neglected to eradicate that his first name was Robert. So that's a tiny little clue in itself. We can cross-check that.
The earliest pages of the Rofstad case file contain a detail that would disappear as the investigation progressed. The possible evidence of a sexual attack.
December 23rd, 1975, 11:59 a.m. Responding to the call of a lady down the 600 block of South Bell Avenue. I arrived first, finding a girl unconscious in the grass at this location with 3 people around her. I had Frank put the girl who found the victim into his squad. The girl that had been molested was identified as Carol Rofstad, 602 South Bell Avenue.
Molested. Why would the officer write that word?
She was covered, but her panties and stockings were down to her knees. I asked Dr. Sands if the victim could possibly be checked for rape. This was requested because the victim's panties were pulled down. And this time he informed me that due to the poor physical condition of the victim, the fact that she was wearing a tampon and she had been catheterized, this would invalidate any of the tests that might be taken.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
In my mind's eye, Carol must have had her winter coat on. She was coming home from work. She stopped to have a drink at the bar. And why? You're talking about her slip and her nylons. Was there something more that happened that
Well,
I'm not aware of?
well, she was found with her pantyhose down around her ankles.
I did not know that. Was she raped?
So at this point, we've heard about the murder, we've heard from the reports, and we know what transpired that night, or at least what we know so far. Okay. I want to talk about the alleged eyewitness account. We haven't gotten to that point in the reports yet, but there's different aspects of the crime that need to be evaluated here. So, and kind of how they've impacted the investigation as a whole. So starting with the eyewitness account, when she was walking home on the 22nd with her friend, a man was driving down Fell Street on his way back from Springfield, and he had come forward to the police on December 29th. So that's several days after. And he said there was a dark colored car parked in front of 602 South Bell with 2 males on the lawn with a female with long hair. One man was taller, wearing a stocking cap and overcoat, carrying a club, and the other was shorter with his arms outstretched, blocking the female as she was bent over, staggering. So this alleged eyewitness account is what eventually led to the infamous sketch that we will get to, and I'll show you that momentarily. But this also is the second sketch that you're going to see. There were actually 2 sketches done. The first one was done by a Bloomington police officer, and it's never been released to the public, nor has anybody ever seen it. So the sketch that you are about to see is actually the second sketch that was conducted in the investigation. So in the audio clip, you'll hear how the suspect was described by this alleged eyewitness, and it is similar to the suspects that we believe were involved. So that's the sketch.
I wound up doing work for, of course, the FBI, the Illinois State Police, the sheriffs, and city departments.
6 days after Carol Rofstad was bludgeoned,
Normal police called me.
he made a meticulous drawing.
The detail work in that sketch is remarkable.
Based on an eyewitness account.
I came in to meet the fellow. I was just intent on listening to what he said.
A guy wearing a stocking cap with a relatively neat beard and hair down over his collar.
He ended up with this sketch that was a bearded character. Kind of describe it for me as you recall.
This guy, oh, okay, I haven't looked at that in 30 years. be darned. It might be.
So the first beep that you heard is suspect one, as we refer to him in the podcast. So we don't use anybody's names in the podcast. We use a variety of different beeps. So there's 3 different beeps that you'll hear throughout the podcast, and that was the first one, and that is assigned to suspect one. And while the sketch does match the description of the suspect from our investigation, it proves itself to be unreliable and misleading. And it doesn't make sense to maintain that the description of the alleged suspect when the eyewitness account isn't valid. So while it does support our suspect's appearance, it's not fair to have the sketch up there when we don't believe that the eyewitness account was legit. So for example, it was also released that the eyewitness said the suspect had green eyes. So if you recall, he's driving down the street. It's impossible to see someone's eye color from that far away at 10 o'clock at night. I can't even tell you your eye colors right now from this far away. So that is our assessment of that. And then in 2008, when the case was reopened, that individual, the alleged eyewitness, was brought back for questioning, and he said he did not recognize the area, that he was brought back to the actual spot where the murder took place. And he claims that he didn't recognize the area, he didn't recall being taken back to the scene, and he didn't recall the sketch at all. However, the sketch still remained on the Illinois State Police website. The sketch remained up there up until 2022, once we started the podcast and we started our investigation 2 years ago. And we started kind of digging back into it. So it is off the website now. Okay. Getting into the murder weapon, perhaps one of the most vital aspects of any murder case. And it was always described as a railroad tie in a lot of the reports, and in the media, it was described as such as well in newspaper articles. And I've included a standard Google image of what a railroad tie looks like. And then that's also an actual crime scene photo of the piece of wood. And I mean, in my opinion, they look totally different, but it could be a piece of a railroad tie, nobody knows, but that is the actual piece of wood. And then for scale, you have a railroad tie in full view of a full railroad tie, what that looks like. But the most important issue surrounding the murder weapon is the fact that it was taken out of evidence and passed around an ISU classroom in the mid-90s, I believe, is when the report actually says that. And it was given to an ISU criminal justice professor, and that in turn violates chain of custody because you're not supposed to take evidence out for an open case, obviously. And that compromises any extraction of DNA on the actual murder weapon. However, it is an actual fact that it was taken out of evidence because it is detailed in the reports that it was released from Normal Police Department custody. So I'm going to play an audio clip about the murder weapon, and then I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Where do we stand on the murder weapon in a professor's hands?
You know what? I don't know if that's folklore or what.
For years, a rumor had been circulating about the murder weapon.
Was it a baseball bat? Was it a 4x4? Was it a 2x2?
It had been taken out of evidence by someone. I have one question about an item that is actually listed, and it's just kind of a weird entry. Some of the records we got through Freedom of Information provided a hint. Third from the bottom, it talks about two Polaroids of exhibit number 4 before and after original package removed. And like exhibit number 4 is the piece of wood with red stuff on it. So I'm assuming it's the murder weapon. The only Normal police officer who spoke with us early on the record was forthcoming.
Do you guys keep like an updated evidence list? I guess I'm just wondering like where that evidence would be.
It's all,
You guys still
in our
keep it,
vault,
right?
yeah.
Because it's an open case.
yes, and
Yeah.
from what I understand, I can't speak 100% to it, there, throughout the years, I don't know for a fact, but I've heard that there was some issues with evidence at times.
I would love to meet the cop that gave the murder weapon away to the college professor.
Was it somebody he thought could help? Do you know that?
I don't know. The records clerk described a supplemental report that had been accidentally left out of the material sent to us. She apologized for the omission.
It was like 89 pages. Yeah, it was a biggie.
What sounded outrageous was revealed in the police file in black and white.
September 18th, 1997. The wood had somehow been released for use in a classroom at Illinois State University. It was on display as an actual murder weapon and had been handled by an untold number of people over an unknown amount of time. No prints or DNA due to being in classroom and unprotected. Piece of railroad tie believed to be the murder weapon was later displayed at ISU criminal justice classes, so it has been compromised.
That's sick. That is, what a disgrace to her name to, have somebody have it hanging there like his trophy. We've gotta get that back. We're not gonna have a trophy hanging on the wall. And whoever that policeman is, I don't, we'll have to look into whether that's legal or not for that policeman to have taken the murder weapon.
Number one, it shows awful police work, but number two, it's really disrespectful to Carol. That is horrible. In my eyes.
I don't know who he gave it to. Was it a scientist? I mean, I don't know. Can't use that for evidence. We have DNA today. Her clothes, her purse, her tampon, I don't know. Is that fair? Can we test DNA? What's going on?
That's when I knew it would never be solved. When I heard that back in 2008 or something, that was when I knew. I had little hope before then, but when the murder weapon's been contaminated like that, it's compromised, I'm stunned that someone would do that, because it's just, I noticed watching TV, you can't remove evidence like that, It's just not done.
And then in episode 11, we actually do track down the professor who had the weapon in his classroom. From our conversation, he claims that he had no idea it was an open case still. He apparently had a relationship with Normal Police Department where, a couple officers every now and then would just give him weapons to show his classroom, to show students what could be constituted as a weapon, what different things can be used as a weapon. And obviously he assumed that they were all closed cases because that would violate chain of custody. But from his conversation, you can hear it in episode 11, he stands his ground that he had no idea it was an open case and that these were just given to him, and he does not know which cases they were associated with. He just had basic facts about it. And we also talked to some students who did see the weapon in the classroom as well. Okay. So fast forward to 1977 now, this is 2 years after the murder. A man by the name of David Whitmer, who is in the Macon County Jail in Decatur, confesses to the crime. He says that he killed Carol and he was in jail for purse snatching. However, he does have 25 years of psychiatric problems, including institutionalization. And initially, the deputies in the jail had ignored his proclamations because, well, he's not reliable, he's crazy. But then they did discover that he was living in Bloomington in 1975. So they started to pay closer attention to what he was saying. However, he did recant that same day and said he made it up because he just wants to be transferred back to Chester Mental Health Facility. So I have a little clip about that as well.
My father all along was disgusted as time went on. going. And my mother used to say, I have to keep him from them because, you know, she thought he would start yelling at them and that kind of thing.
Out of the blue, normal police score what you might call a convenient confession. A purse snatcher sitting in the county jail says he killed Carol. Within a month, bypassing a grand jury, the state's attorney charges him with murder.
And he had psychotic reasons for wanting to go to the higher security prison, something about like cigarettes or something.
The headline is, you know, innocent man could get pinned with the unsolved case, which by the way is still unsolved.
Some public officials, including the prosecutor, were willing to sit down and, you know, talk to us in an interview.
You know, this can't be him. Everything that he said, he could have read. And he's in the orange jump, swaying from side to side up there in front of the judge and everything. And obviously, the patient.
So eventually the charges were dropped against David Whitmer, but not till 3 years later. So he was technically still charged with the murder of Carol Rofstad for 3 years up until the state's attorney decided to drop the charges. The issue with this is really that he could have been transferred to that mental health facility and still charged with the murder and then never convicted because he would have to wait to go back to court for all of this. So it could really take a long time, but ultimately it did take 3 years for them to drop the charges against David Whitmer. And the article that I have up here is from the Post-American, which was a tiny little paper that we reference in the podcast. And it's actually really interesting. If you Google the article, whenever we're, you know, doing our research for this, it's always interesting to compare the methods that they used back then to now. They literally name everybody and everything in this article. And it's really interesting because obviously that would never be the case nowadays. So it's always surprising to see what went on back then as opposed to what would go on now during a motion. Okay. So in the podcast, if you've listened, we reference 3 potential suspects, and these are suspects that we've concluded ourselves to be potential suspects from reading reports and speaking to people and gathering our own independent investigation. And we know David Whitmer didn't do it. So he's not listed up here as one of those people. The first suspect is that first beep that you heard a couple slides ago. And this particular individual was an ISU student in 1975, and he became student association president. So he was rather a big name on campus. And several Delta Zetas knew him, and he had met Carol several times based on the accounts that we've heard from several individuals. We have references of this in the podcast. It is alleged that he spoke to 2 sorority sisters on the night of Carol's murder, saying that he was so sorry that this happened and he knew facts that nobody could have known. And that's all detailed in the earlier episodes. He also has a criminal history from his time at ISU. Suspect 2 lived next door to the sorority house, and he had an ex-wife who had gone to the police back at that time, and she told police that she believed he could have been involved because he came home that night covered in blood and sweat, and she thinks he could have had something to do with this. But she was dismissed and nothing was ever followed up with her because she had a history of mental illness, and that's what we've gathered from that. Suspect number 3 was also a Central Illinois native. He died in 2001, and he ran with suspects 1 and 2. He also has a lengthy criminal history. I mean, cops knew his name because he was running wild at that point in time. He also moved to Tennessee later, and let's see, does it have the year? No. But he ended up committing suicide. At least that's what his family members have told us. They firmly believe that he committed suicide on the anniversary of Carol's death in 2001. So he was killed in a drunk driving accident, but many people firmly believe that that was a suicide. So those are the three that we identify with different beeps throughout the podcast, but perhaps the most, that beep you just heard, that's the one you're going to hear most often throughout the podcast. We have a lot of people who have things to say about that individual. Okay. And a lot of the people, I just want to remind everybody that we've talked to have either contacted us and said they want to tell us about their time at ISU and what they heard about this. And they either knew Carol, they knew people in the sorority, they're somehow associated with this and they want to tell their story. Or we have contacted them through our investigation. And I do want to share one compelling encounter that's in episode 7. And this is an ISU student who knew suspect 1 very well and was very close with his running mate for the Student Body Association. And she recalled a specific encounter with the suspect that has haunted her ever since. And it's one of the better clips from the podcast, but I think it will give you kind of an idea of the people that you're dealing with. Let's see.
It's been almost 50 years since the editor has revisited these memories. She thought she had left them behind in the proverbial rearview mirror. But that's where she may have seen this clearly, a week or so after Carol's murder on a drive to Chicago.
A previous student association president by the name of Scott Nixon, he was killed in an accident. He was hit by a semi. A lot of people from ISU were going to go. Henry arranged that I would drive, of course, that he would ride with me in the back seat, and this sorority gal, she was like handheld president, Jackie, would ride with us in the front seat with me. We were driving through campus on Phil and drove past the house. And I said, man, what about this? You know, and to this point, I didn't know that he knew her or whatever, you know, I had no suspicions, anything. God almighty, I feel so bad for her family and so forth. And says, she's an effing bitch. And I looked up, I remember in the rearview mirror and made eye contact with Henry. And the look on his face matched the look on my face, like, God, did you hear that? And I said, yeah. So Jackie turned around a little bit and she said, oh, you knew her? And he said, oh, yeah, she's a bitch. Did he do it? The truth is worth knowing. No matter what the circumstances, the truth is worth knowing. That here, all of us for all these years have been saying, he did. Well, what if he didn't?
So the case goes cold, fast forward X amount of years. And a lot of people ask how we kind of got involved. I know this has kind of been all over the place from going back to the podcast and then the actual crime. So I want to just kind of explain how we got involved in this. And George Seibel, who is our lead investigator and former retired Chicago homicide detective. He is one of the main voices you'll hear in the podcast. He used to work at Morton College in Cicero, and he started the Cold Case Institute, where he taught a class on cold cases. He would have his students go out and find a case that they wanted to work on and see if they can do some good on it. So his students found this case in 2008. They investigated a little bit, and then it sort of was reopened again in 2008, went cold again. Flash forward to like 2020, I was getting my master's in journalism, and I was kind of similar to what George had his students do, my professor told me to go out and find a story to do about any kind of crime story in Illinois. So I stumbled upon Carol's case, contacted George, and we've been doing this ever since. And my aunt, who is also the co-producer, she is a longtime investigative journalist. She's been in TV for 40 years. She has her own production company. And she also went to Illinois Wesleyan, as did I. So when I shared the story with her, I was like, we got to do something with this. We have to. So that was how Carol's Last Christmas was born. And there's, well, I should change that. There's 13 episodes now. We just had 2 more released in November. And just now that we've kind of covered everything in the investigation that we can, from Freedom of Information Act requests, all that kind of stuff. We've right now have just been covering attacks in the 1970s around that time. And in the last 2 episodes, episodes 12 and 13, you'll kind of hear about some encounters from the 70s of victims that have come forward to talk to us, and their attacks are creepily similar to the attack on Carol and to what other people have experienced at that point in time, pretty much on the same street, on Fell Street. So it's very eerie, but that's kind of where our research is going right now. And we just want to keep it going, even if we're not, you know, talking exactly about Carol's case. We can talk about what was going on in the area in the 70s that would kind of give us more insight into Carol's case. So a few takeaways too. One of our stances that my team wanted to communicate to is one of the things that we go back and evaluate is the investigation on the police's end. Our investigation, we're constantly analyzing and reflecting on what we've done. And one of the conclusions we've that perhaps one of the biggest missteps was not granting suspect 2 immunity when he wanted to come forward and say, I know what happened, but I want immunity from prosecution. And it's not that easy, but if that immunity was granted, what would happen? We don't know. But that's one point in particular that we are very opinionated on. We really think that if that was maybe looked into a little more, that things could have ended up differently. But that's just something that we've kind of taken away from our investigation. And let's see, what else do we have here? So yeah, we've covered a lot. I mean, 1975 to now 2023, and this is still going. And the Carol's Last Christmas production is still going, like I said. So we still continue to do this every day. This is 3 years in running now. And we've combined over 5,000 hours worth of work amongst all of us to producing this, and it's been quite a success. So this is, as of like a couple weeks ago, we've had over 30,000 listens, which is very exciting for us considering we've never done anything like this before, and it's just been like an accident, like we came across it and this is what we're doing. So we're not going to stop. And then, okay, I want to leave time for questions because we're getting, well, we still have time. We're okay. But questions and comments. So I also want to end with special thanks to Mimi and everybody at the Bloomington Library. We did a similar presentation to this at the Normal Library a couple months ago. So we're trying to just get more exposure and tell Carol's story the best way we can so that she's not forgotten. And, you know, that's pretty much it. Did you have anything you want to add?
Well, we just want to say thank you guys so much for coming out. It means so much to us and to Carol's family and to everyone who knew Carol, for you guys to come out and listen to us talk about her and her story, because the main thing we want to do is to keep her memory alive, and it's been far too long and she deserves to have justice, and we hope that we can get that for her.
So I'm going to leave the rest of the time for questions and comments and things like that. We can do them on Zoom too, if people have questions on Zoom that they want to ask.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are suspect 1 and suspect 2 still alive?
Yes, they are.
Hello?
Have you had any opportunity to reach out to
suspect 1 and 2?
So when
interview
we,
them?
yeah, so when we first started the podcast, as journalists, we have to obviously hear every side of the story. So we did make attempts to reach out to everybody mentioned. So obviously we weren't going to refer to them by name, but we did send them certified letters saying, hey, we're doing this podcast. We don't reference your name, but it's very much implied. And if anybody does their research, you can kind of figure out like who's talking and who's not talking. And you can piece it together if you really wanted to. So we never heard back from either of them, but we did send certified letters twice in attempts to get in contact with them, and they didn't come back, you know, undelivered. So they were signed and received. It's just that is their no comment essentially. So.
You had any communication with the Normal Police?
Yeah, we have actually. We've developed a really good relationship with them, especially with George Seibel. He's communicated with a lot of the detectives there, and we're on the same page. I mean, we all want the same thing. We want justice for Carol. Obviously, we're not here to like point fingers or anything. We just want to come out. We all want this to be solved. And by going through this and like seeing what went wrong, we're all just trying to get answers in the end. So we're not out to like say, oh, hey, here's what Normal Police did wrong or whatever, but we have to go through and look through everything as our investigation and just to help Normal Police, but we have developed a really good relationship with them, so.
There's a question from the chat, sorry. And they would like to know if the person that you thought was immunity, are there any plans to revisit speaking with that person? Suspect 2.
Person 2, I can't really speak on that just because I'm not the prosecutor, I'm not the police, so it's still their investigation. And, you know, they give us as many updates as we can, but that's ultimately balls in their court for that. So I couldn't really speak to that.
So they're still stuck ongoing.
Oh yeah, it's still being actively investigated. And I mean, we've made little victories like having the sketch taken down, and, you know, more people have come forward that we've talked to that we can refer to Normal Police and say, hey, we talked to this person. Have you guys talked to this person? And we kind of work together on that end. So.
Yeah. You have the same opinion, or we have the same opinion you do, that a lot of things weren't handled appropriately.
Yes.
I'm assuming that the current Normal Police probably have the same opinion that things were not handled appropriately. So in that respect, it sort of has a little bit to do with her. Do you know if they've gone back and revisited any of the questions with suspect 1 and suspect 2?
I don't know if they've made contact with them or what they've asked them. All we can do is really just like reach out, say, you know, we found this, we've done this, but it's still their investigation. So we just continue to push and, you know. Yeah, sorry, you had your hand
Is there
first.
any evidence from the crime scene that is not tampered with that the Normal Police still have?
Yeah, I know you want to
Yeah,
talk about that a
I
little
do
bit.
believe that they still have all her clothing and her purse that she had on. And I would believe that they have looked into trying to do forensic genetic genealogy on those, because if those were not handled and kept in the evidence locker that like they should have been, I don't see how they couldn't retrieve DNA from it or fingerprints or anything. So we do not know if they've tried testing those evidence items, but it would definitely be a good idea.
And if there was going to be DNA recovered, it would have to be from the clothes and the purse and shoes and whatever. Nothing is going to get recovered from the murder weapon. And no, I don't think anybody even knows where that is to this day. So, yeah.
It goes along with that because I am about a little over halfway through the podcast. And so I know that they have the DNA of 1, 2, and 3. That's what it says, is that they have their DNA. So like if they have done testing or are going to be testing, would they have to, release whether that they found any DNA on if they have the DNA of the 3 people and they can search the things that they do have for the specific DNA, they can either say, yes, we found something, or no, we didn't find anything, you know?
I mean, they can't release that to the public because it's an ongoing investigation. So that's just standard procedure. I mean, if they do have something, they're going to use that to formulate a case to ultimately charge somebody with the crime, but it wouldn't even be appropriate for investigators to release their progress throughout the investigation.
Whether DNA has been found on it or not, even, would be something.
Right, unless it's in reports, but I mean, it is hard to get reports through the Freedom of Information Act because it's an open case. So in that regard, things are limited. So I mean, they can give us redacted things, but we can only assume or piece together, hey, we think this, you know, this portion of this report pertains to suspect 1 or suspect 2 or suspect 3. So that's stuff that we've kind of like pieced together based on what we get from our Freedom of Information Act requests. But we don't, you know, sit in a room with the police and talk about like who we've gotten DNA from or that kind of thing. I mean, that's just like the way it goes in
And-
terms of.
Yeah, I do believe
Investigation.
that the DNA profile that they obtained back in 2008 or in the 2000s, whenever, was not a full DNA profile. So that wouldn't have been able to be tested against the 3 suspects' DNA. However, if they are going to return and try to do more DNA analysis and they do extract a full DNA profile, that's when they would be able to test against other candidates.
Were any of the suspects interviewed by normal police?
I don't know. Around the time?
Around the time the murder happened?
I don't know. If you, in the reports, they'll reference like, oh, this person or this person was not polygraphed. And obviously the people we've talked to have had their opinions on, oh, I know for sure that this person didn't pass or this person was never questioned. So I mean, I don't know for sure when they've talked to these people, these suspects. We don't even know if it's, you know, who specifically they're talking to.
Yeah, we don't have any like definitive proof that states, oh, this suspect was interviewed and this person has polygraphed or anything like that. There's nothing that was in the files about that. So
and we
have-
talk about that too in the podcast,
Yeah.
like how we've kind of come to these conclusions just from the stuff that we did obtain. Yeah.
Would it be a strategy to offer the one gentleman that maybe the suspect and two that wanted immunity to, in the letter, say, we're willing to offer you immunity? I mean, that's something they can consider to get them to open up.
We can't do that because we're not the state's attorney. They
Well, I know, but
they
I
have
mean,
the
that-
power.
I think that'd be a strategy they'd want.
Oh, yeah, and
pursue.
that's our position, just as from our investigation, we believe they should do that. But we obviously don't have the power to do that.
That's why he's probably not responding to the letters because he hasn't got a.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if I was his attorney, I would say, don't respond to those letters, but I mean,
Right.
yeah, I mean, I would love to hear their sides. I would, as much as I would love to knock on all their doors or track them down, whatever, and ask them questions, you know, reaching out via snail mail is like the only option we have right now.
So is it fair to say, though, you have at least gone through the steps to check to see if they have more of a criminal record?
Oh, yeah, I mean, we can investigate them to the best of our ability. Had other criminal infractions, I mean, as best as anybody
Yeah.
in the public can do,
Yeah,
any layperson can.
We've been able to uncover, especially with suspect number 1, multiple different offenses in different states. So, and same with suspect number 3, who was kind of a rocky dude in central Illinois and in Tennessee. We have been able to find, because those reports of people arrests and charges are public for most states. So we have been able to confirm that they did have a criminal record.
You talked about other cases that happened prior to our suspect 1 and 2. Their names involved in any of those, the other attacks that you talked about happened on cell prior to her?
I don't know. Well, we haven't been able to obtain any police records of other 1970s attacks just because they've been so long ago and they do dispose of them after 7 years, even though they technically are like unsolved, but because it's not like a murder or anything like that, there's not going to be that much of a paper trail. So we wouldn't even be able to see if there's names referenced. We really just go off of like any kind of newspaper articles or archives and things like that to piece that stuff together.
I'm comfortable saying whether, you believe, it was the person or people targeted her because of the encounter or some other issue, like there's some talk of like knowing and targeting, but then there's also the talk of these other incidences. So do you, like, I'm just starting to see, you have an opinion as to whether this was a
like. targeted
So-
or attack?
George Seibel in the podcast, he references this a lot. He says he's much more sure that whoever committed the first attack is the same person who killed her or who targeted her. So he still believes that to be true. If you listen to everybody's perspective too in the podcast, everybody kind of has their own theory on what they believe might be the case in terms of if it's the same person who was conducting attacks in the 70s, is that the same person who committed the murder? In one of the later episodes too, we also talk about Ted Bundy because that was around the time when he was active, and he actually was questioned and asked if he did kill Carol Rofstad. He said no. So I mean, they really exercised all their options in terms of talking about who was running in the area at that time. So I mean, I think everybody kind of has their own opinion on if it would have been the same person, if this is just the attack of the work of like one person as opposed to like multiple people. But I mean, in the 70s too, you know, there's no security cameras or anything. People break in all the time.
Demetria's in the chat. She wants to say
Oh,
something.
okay.
Yeah, she's our co-producer, so yeah.
Let's see.
We can pull it up on here and see.
So, if you go to unmute, her, if she wants to say something,
Press
I
it
don't know
up,
how
right? Oh,
well
yeah.
we'll be able to hear her.
You passed it up.
Oh, I passed it up.
So if you go, she wants to speak directly, so she should be, I see, the screen is, let me just bring her
Okay.
up over
Yeah, go
here.
for
it. No problem.
So sorry.
Oh, no problem.
I didn't even know she was in the chat.
Yeah, I know she was.
I think I will have to stop the screen share for that. Is
That's
that
fine.
okay?
Yeah. 2, 3, 2.
And then, here she is, and then I'm going to find her here. Demetria, can you hear us?
Yeah, I sure can. Can you hear me?
You can hear it on the computer.
Yes, she's on my computer because this one is muted. Well, I'll just turn my volume up super loud and listen to that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
We
fine.
might set up for someone to phone in from home. I'm so sorry.
Can you all hear me?
I'm gonna turn you up.
Okay.
Awesome.
There you go. You can hear her.
Okay, great. First of all, you guys have done a tremendous job outlining the case. It's so complicated. A few things I wanted to just kind of underscore. The other attacks in the 70s, they keep records of cases that do not have a statute of limitations, including rape and assault, only for 7 years. So we have no way of checking the official record. We were kind of amazed that was the case, but it is what it is, and that was 1970s era policing. So we, as Ellie said, we have to rely upon media reports and people's memories. And people's memories are amazingly good. Episode 12 outlines several other attacks, coincidentally, many of them either on or around Fell Street. One on the Illinois Wesleyan campus in 1978, where a number of sorority girls were tied up and one of them raped right in their house, in the A.O. Pie house. If anyone knows anything more about that, please, or involved or know someone that was involved. Another interesting thing was Ted Bundy, that's a name that everyone knows, was also stalking and preying upon sorority girls, but the timeline just didn't work out. So he was actually questioned about Carol before he was executed. And even though the timeline didn't work out, he also denied having anything to do with that. This is complicated in many ways because of the lack of records, but the ones that we do have, once you start piecing them together, you can pretty much discern who they're talking about. And I think in recent months have had more hope than we had when we started on this project, because police seem to be following up on some of the leads. And that's about it. I don't want to take up too much time, but I want to thank a lot of people that I see on the Zoom. Jack Freiberg has been a tremendous help.
Connie, we've talked to you. I see some other familiar names from either email or phone calls. So please remain in touch with us because we find something new almost every day. Thanks.
Yeah.
Random question, but the guy that, well, number one, that said railroad tie in the phone conversation, like right afterwards, when nobody knew. And then railroad ties been used, and like you said, I'm just wondering, like something interesting you said was, like, could be part of a railroad tie. Were there railroad ties around the school, the house at the time? Do they know if there would have been railroad ties used for gardening? Because if he says railroad tie, but it doesn't look like a railroad tie, and then you're talking about part of a railroad tie, that, I mean, he already had what seemed to be a lot of intimate knowledge of, and like right away, like before the people were getting it.
Yeah.
So then that railroad tie thing, to me, I'm like, was there an easy access, like right there, there's railroad ties?
There
walked across the railroad.
Yeah, there is there are railroad tracks that go right by Fell Street.
Yeah, but railroad ties, especially in the 70s, were used in landscaping.
And they're like 300 pounds.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, it could have been just
If it's
like
a
a piece of
part
it.
of one.
I don't know. It's just whether it was said on the phone or through the media or however that got out, it's been described in multiple different accounts. Just we don't know if that's true.
When we first got to that,
Yeah.
in the podcast, yeah, because when it first said the railroad tie and that whole idea, this is a huge thing. Then when that whole, they're talking about size, and I'm like, wait.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but they haven't found it to be able to see if it is in fact a railroad tie.
No. And
'Cause
from
we can at least determine that.
in episode 11, when we speak about the professor and we talk to some of the students who saw that, I mean, they give their description of the weapon and they describe it as more of like a shard of wood, not so much like a perfectly cut piece of something. So, yeah, I mean, yeah.
In regards to the murder weapon, has Carol's family ever considered, like, was there any legal action against the police department for releasing that? Or like mishandling evidence like that? Or the case is still considered open?
I can't really speak to any like pending litigation if that was ever done or not. And because it's an open case, I'm assuming that like no legal action would take place until there's more resolution in view. But I mean, to my knowledge, no, there's been nothing like that. Yeah.
Is there talk about whether this is intentional or incompetence? Because there's a lot of like the sketch that's never been seen, and then this idea that maybe there was some, like, we think this is who did it, and here's some information, green eyes, details, blah, 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 blah. Like, and just the fact that like so many different things, were the suspects like, did they have ties in the community? Did they have, you know, money? Did they have, you know what I'm saying? Like, are there any reason that this could have been not?
Believe me, every
unintentional?
question that you're in your head, we've probably thought through 500 plus times and still keeps me awake at night. So I mean, we're still looking into all those angles. Personally, I don't think there was any malicious intent by the police department. I think that's a stretch. And you know, think back to the 70s too, and just college towns. How many murders really take place on campus at that time? Like, I'm sure whoever was working the murder too at the time, maybe this was their first murder. I mean, you don't know where to turn. I can't speak for the mistakes of, you know, predecessors, and even the people who are at the Normal Police Department now, they were not here in the 70s. So they have to work with what they're given to, so they can't, you know.
Yeah, and I think, well, and still did attend ISU in 1975, never heard of Carol's case. Due to the fact that this happened during Christmas break, there weren't many students around anyways, but we believe that the university purposefully tried to keep it hush hush and did not talk about her or make an announcement, or even, you know, make an announcement to say, hey, there's a murder on the loose, probably be safe out here.
Well, which makes sense. I mean,
Well,
I was,
even when
yeah,
attacks.
right.
Yeah, and all of these attacks were going on and they were still putting anything out for women to be safe.
Yeah.
It was very hush hush. And
Well,
with,
and I mean, it's just so unheard of to have a brutal murder like this, like around an area where you pass every day, where students, your peers pass by every day. Like, it's just unheard of. So I think there is like a shock factor for the police and for the community. I mean, this is just so shocking to everybody
Yes.
at the time and now.
And with suspect number one being student body president, he did have a lot of power in the community and on campus, and he was very well known. And for someone who has a lot of power like that, I'm sure he, you know, if that is someone who is capable of something like that, you know who to talk to and people respect you. So there is a sort of power dynamic there.
And in the episode where we talk about the sketch really quick, then I'll get to your question. We do talk about the Red Lion bar, and we do believe at one point we toyed with the idea of if suspect one had ties to the Red Lion, and now at first we said no, we kind of came to the conclusion that no, that was not a tie, but now we're thinking that there was. So if you read Demetria's comment, we do now believe that there is indeed a family connection to the Red Lion bar, because there used to be a Red Lion in Bloomington. Yeah.
Well, and wasn't suspect one voted out then as president?
He resigned after, I believe, after this time. I mean, he was president in 1975, so I don't think he even did a full year as student association president. Yeah, it was a vote of no confidence.
And wasn't there like an accusation brought against him?
It was after he had tried to.
Well, he was convicted of battery.
Yeah, he was convicted of battering another ISU
Another
girl.
student.
Yeah.
Did you guys talk to her?
Yes, she chose, she didn't want to be named, she didn't want her voice in the podcast, but we did speak to her and she gave us permission to use her name. She just didn't want her voice in the podcast.
The suspect number two, was he a friend of suspect number one?
We believe they all knew each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then with suspect number two, so like your last two episodes, was he the one that had gone in, that he was selling insurance? And
No.
Greta Alexander?
No, so the person who was selling insurance, we believe that was the person who suspect one kind of, he told him to go to the cellar and look out for this girl and kind of stalk her and, you know.
So that wasn't.
No, that's not suspect two. Yeah.
Is suspect one still in the area?
I'm not gonna comment on that just because it's an ongoing investigation, so I'm not gonna talk about like suspect whereabouts. All I can tell you is suspect 3 is dead, so, and he was in Tennessee. That's definitive, so I mean, yeah.
But they don't believe that. Like, I was a little confused listening about the eyewitness thing.
They don't believe what?
They don't view police, they don't believe that that person actually did witness them anything, or that they might.
We don't really want to take it as 100%, because if you think about, you know, you can't see someone's eye color, you cannot see someone's full facial features from, you know, at 10 o'clock at night in the pitch black dark at, you know, 400 feet on the road. So it's just more of a opinion of ours that it is not.
Well, we talk
reliable.
about that in one of the episodes too, and we did follow up with the attorney who the alleged eyewitness hired. He never got back to us. So I mean, it's a little strange for someone who's just an eyewitness to hire legal counsel. It's a little weird, but like, I mean, you know, he was a foreign exchange student. So I mean, we're not saying that there wasn't an eyewitness. We're just saying that the descriptions that he's giving and these all alleged accounts, which he cannot even verify in 2008, again, when he was brought back to the scene, like, it's just not enough to say like, yes, there was an eyewitness. This is what we saw. This is what was seen, you know.
And even though the sketch may favor one of our suspects, in a legal sense, it is not smart to use something that could not be 100% in a case, even if it does benefit our side. It's just, as legal sense, you would not want to do that in either way, in either favor of any side. So that is why we, you know, believe.
Yeah.
Around that time, I'm from here.
Oh, okay.
I think suspect one called me.
Really?
Yeah.
Were you a Delta Zeta?
No,
Oh, okay.
I went to ISU, but I
Uh-huh.
wasn't in a sorority.
Uh-huh.
But he said he was working at Holiday Inn. Do you know anything about that? Like the
I don't think
nighttime?
we've, I
But
don't
he said
think
the
we,
police were really bothering him about this murder and about attacking girls. They were all over him. He was innocent and all this stuff.
yeah.
I knew him from I mean, I knew what he looked like, but I didn't know him. But back then you could look up phone numbers.
Yeah.
It was at my
Mhm.
parents'
Yeah, the
house.
phone books still
Yeah.
were a thing, you
It
know.
was like 10 o'clock at night at my parents' house.
About what year would that have been?
I'm guessing like 76 or
76, 77?
Yeah, I mean, that's around the
But
time
he said, "I'm
all
at
these
work at
attacks were
Holiday Inn
happening.
Right now I work at night at the desk.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think we've ever linked a Holiday into suspect one,
Okay.
but
maybe.
I mean,
Yeah.
we'd have to go
I
back.
just,
and look.
I always remembered that he said he was working at the Holiday Inn.
Yeah, Demetrius said like we would love to talk and hear about that more.
Yeah, if you want, I can give you my card.
Yeah.
Any other questions? We have till 8:30, right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, we can still keep going.
Why do you think, well, I don't know, it's speculation and stuff, but the sketch one disappeared, this is like, I don't understand. like,
Sketch one?
No one can say anything about sketch one. or what
So,
sketch one is and why. it's
George
sketch.
spoke to the Bloomington officer who did do the sketch. He just doesn't know like what happened to it or whatever, and they never used it in the media for any purposes. They only used sketch two, but we know that there were two sketches from both departments.
And where did the sketch two came from, the eyewitness's description, but sketch
Correct.
one, where did that?
I don't know if sketch one came from the eyewitness as well, or if it was just we know it was a separate sketch because it was done by a Bloomington police officer. But I mean, sketch two was done by the sketch artist whose voice you hear.
Yeah, there's many things that we just don't have the answers to. And just like Demetria said, that a lot of these officers who did work on the case have since passed away. So a lot of questions, we can't have answered.
But I can tell you, we know it's in the report that the sketch one was never released. Nobody's ever seen it, but it was done by a Bloomington officer.
Those are like now 4 calls, the 4 people that have gotten calls, is that?
No, at least 4 people have passed.
No,
No.
Demetria said at least 4 people have.
Yeah,
gotten calls
from suspect number 1.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, he
That same suspect?
yes, we talk about it in the podcast that he had called sorority sisters when she was attacked before it was reported to the news that she was attacked, and he had all these things to say to them about, oh, I'm so sorry about your sorority sister and stuff like that, when that wasn't common knowledge to people yet. Suspect one. Yes.
It's like great indicator that I like the comment about the fact that it was right before Christmas and Bloomington was or normal.
Yeah.
Would have been considered like a ghost town.
It's a college town. Everybody's gone home.
Christmas break. It
Yeah.
really was. Yeah.
Yes. Suspect 3 was from Bloomington,
From
and
Central
then
Illinois,
and then he later moved to Tennessee.
Any other questions? Yeah.
All right,
No,
well,
it's okay.
the document at the very beginning of the presentation, it was about playing pool with their dad, like, was that placing someone at a location?
The
the night of
document at the
attack?
It was redacted.
It was very.
It was redacted.
But there was like playing pool with dad.
Oh,
with father
George's
in the bar, and it says like placing them.
This one?
Where it says admits to being with both on that date.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know who that is,
Yeah,
obviously, because it's
This
redacted,
is
but
what we receive from normal police.
Yeah.
So all that we kind of have to piece together things, and some things you literally can't, because we can't figure out what who they're talking about, whose names are being brought up.
That's not necessarily relevant to like this date. I just threw that in there so you could see what a redacted document looks like. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that, the text on there is not like, no, sorry.
That's not this.
No, that's this case. This is a real document we've received through FOIA, but it's not, I mean, there's no significance to this exact one. I just put it on there so you can see what a redacted
Yeah.
document looks like.
And are you saying that this article and then the next article that you have up?
So these are articles that pertain to like the slide. So I mean, this is just an article that was published after she passed.
Was it the pantograph or was that the ISU?
This
The
is
pantograph.
This one.
That's the
This is a
pantograph.
pantograph, but there's a lot of Vidette articles too.
Yes.
A lot, yeah.
Yes.
And, okay,
Um,
and I'm assuming like this one.
Mhm. This is the Post-American.
This is the Post-American.
We can look that up, we can read that?
Yeah, so if you look up, I think,
We have a link to the Post-American on the Bloomington
Oh,
Library website.
see? Yeah, there you go.
the Post-American, and it is
It's all collected at the Eastern Illinois News Database.
Yes.
They have every single issue of the Post-American scanned. There's a link under the newspapers. on the
And
Bloomington
it is,
Public Library's website.
I believe it's volume 6, number 6.
It's long too. This is literally
Yeah,
like one of
it's a few
6
pages
pages.
into the volume, but it's very long, and I highly recommend you all to read up on it because it's very detailed, very well written, and like Ally said, has a lot of stuff that you couldn't necessarily put in a paper now.
Yeah,
So,
for
And
sure.
and that maybe you have it included in the podcast.
yes.
Good.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think this was a Vidette one,
Yeah, I
believe,
think that was Vidette.
because they just refer to him
'Cause
as a
they're-
CIA.
Yeah, they're talking
Yeah.
about him.
And how long after the death was, after Carol was murdered, that this guy was killed? Was it like a half a year or?
It wasn't that long.
I don't think it was even fully a year.
Yeah, it was
This
only
was-
a few months.
When was this? Hold on, wait.
Because I remember.
Does it say in there? The date?
December 30th.
Oh, December 30th.
Oh, so it's
So it was
just-
like right after it happened, yeah.
Who's the one that was killed?
He was the former student. Yeah, Scott Nixon.
Okay.
You know the approximate age of three suspects at the time?
At the time?
I mean, I know one was
Older.
considerably older. 'Cause he
Yeah.
was a veteran.
Correct.
He started college after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was like 26, 27, I
And
think.
3 was around the same age as Carol.
Yeah, I think the other 2 were around
The same age as
the
Carol.
same age, mid to mid-20s, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
None of them were students, well, except for the older.
except for the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Demetria is sharing that in episode 12, you'll hear more about another woman who was attacked around Christmas who had stayed to work. Well, yeah, perfect. You can show that up here. And
Yeah.
also, she touts the Post-American, which, yes, won many awards, was one of the longest running independent newspapers in the country. And interestingly enough, she adds that the reporter is now an ACLU lawyer.
Yeah.
Is that how you spell it?
With a K?
Yeah.
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 There used to be 3 Ks. Obviously, that was taken out.
It was the alternative paper. You would find a lot of really interesting ads. It was still in existence when I went to ISU.
Really? Yeah.
We loved it.
Yeah, I think they did it like early 2000s.
Yeah.
That's when they ended it. Yeah, like the art in that paper is crazy. Like,
Yeah.
it's funny.
Okay. Well, we'll stick around for a while. I mean, I'll let you guys, we'll kind of wrap it up because we have 15 minutes till 8:30. So we'll stick around and answer a few questions, but we'll end the Zoom meeting and everything. So, and I have.
Share your email.
Oh, great. Yep.
Christmas@gmail.com in the chat because people were asking how they could submit any of their
Yes,
information.
yes.
So-
And I have business cards if you want my card, but I mean, if you, the Carol's Last Christmas website too, you can go on at any time and submit feedback or anything like